The galaxy never welcomed humanity. It found them. The Galactic Union, a sprawling coalition of ancient species, discovered Earth during one of its expansion surveys. The humans, still fractured by borders and politics, were unprepared. Their resistance was brief, spirited, and ultimately crushed. Earth's skies burned, its leaders silenced, and its people taken. The Union didn't want Earth's culture or diplomacy. It wanted its labor. Humanity was declared a Class 3 utility species. Not citizens, not allies, tools. Dane Keller was born years after Earth's fall, not on the blue planet itself, but beneath the scarlet dust of Revac 7, a mining world deep in Union territory. He had never seen a tree, never touched rain. His sun was artificial. His sky was steel. The only stories he knew of Earth came from broken whispers passed down by the old ones, those too stubborn to forget. He worked in the mines by age 6, hauling fusion drill cores alongside hundreds of others. Overseers, massive insectoid creatures called Chakseri, patrolled the tunnels with venom-laced prods. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The rules were carved into every scar, every scream. But Dane watched, not just the Chakseri, everything. He noticed which shifts had weaker guards, which tunnels echoed less, which supply droids lingered too long at checkpoints. While others learned to keep their heads down, Dane learned to memorize. He saw more than dirt and darkness. He saw patterns. At night, in the rusted bunks of Sector 9, Dane would whisper stories. Not of rebellion. Those were too dangerous. But of Earth. Green forests. Blue oceans. Machines that flew. Music that made you feel things you couldn't name. Most kids thought he was making it all up, but a few listened like it mattered. One night, after a rock slide sealed off an old tunnel, Dane was assigned to help clear it. But something caught his eye. A glow, faint and blue, flickering behind a crack in the wall. Curious, he dug deeper when no one was watching. Behind the rubble, he found a room. It was small, half-collapsed, and ancient. Inside were crates sealed with Terran script. Most had rotted, but one held a small device still humming with life. A projection flickered to life, showing diagrams, texts, and a language he somehow recognized. English. The device spoke. Welcome, Terran user. Interface activated. Dane didn't smile. He stared, transfixed. It wasn't just a tool. It was proof. Proof that humans had once touched the stars with pride. Not chains. That they had built, fought, dreamed. That they had belonged. He took the device and buried it in his sleeping mat, heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel broken. He felt awake. And somewhere deep in the galaxy, something began to shift. Dane's discovery changed everything. The device he had found in the rubble wasn't just some relic. It was the key to a forgotten world. A world where humanity wasn't a slave, but a pioneer. It was a lifeline, a connection to something more than the endless, grinding work of the mines. That night, after the overseers made their rounds, Dane stayed awake, poring over the device's contents. It wasn't just an artifact. It was a treasure trove of knowledge. Manuals, engineering schematics, old military tactics, and forgotten languages. He committed every word to memory, never daring to let it slip from his hands. He had no way of knowing it, but that small glowing fragment of Earth history was a bomb waiting to go off. It carried with it the stories of a people who had once risen from nothing to conquer space, to shape worlds. It was proof that humans were capable of far more than menial labor and bloodshed. They were builders, explorers, dreamers. But dreams are dangerous in chains. The next day, as the sunless sky above Revac 7 flickered a dull red, Dane couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of the mine were closing in. Every passing overseer, every echo of a boot against the stone, made his pulse race. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hide the device or keep his thoughts contained. He had read about rebellion, about uprisings. But the cost of speaking out was death. And yet there was a fire inside him now, a fire that couldn't be snuffed out. Humans weren't born to kneel. They weren't born to serve. He had to do something with what he knew, or risk losing the last piece of humanity he had left. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. It was just another routine punishment. One of the other prisoners, an older man named Tarek, had been caught trying to hoard extra rations. He was brought out before the others, chained and bloodied. The Chaksari overseer, a massive creature with long, jagged mandibles, raised its electric prod to administer the punishment. Tarek begged. He had no strength left to resist. And that's when it happened. In a moment of desperation, Dane stood. The voice that had been growing in his chest broke free. "Stop," he shouted, his voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the cavernous hall. The overseer froze. Every head turned toward him. Dane felt his breath catch in his throat. He had just signed his death warrant. He knew it. The overseers wouldn't tolerate disobedience. But there was something else in the air, a strange, almost tangible crackling of energy. Fear, and something else. Hope. The overseer stepped toward him, its multi-eyed gaze cold and unblinking. "Kill him," it ordered, its voice a raspy hiss. But Dane didn't back down. His chest heaved as he faced the creature. He didn't want to die, but in that moment, he realized he would rather die with his voice heard than continue to live in silence. "I will not bow," he whispered, but loud enough for all to hear. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The overseer hesitated, its claws twitching, unsure. For a second, time seemed to stop. And then something broke inside Dane. A part of him, a small piece of humanity, had shattered the silence. That was all it took. A spark. Dane's defiance had consequences. The Chaksari overseer's claws flashed, and within moments, Dane was shackled, dragged by chains, and thrown into the belly of a transport ship. His heart raced as the ship lifted off, leaving Revac 7's rust-colored horizon behind. He didn't know where they were taking him, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was over. The Union didn't tolerate insubordination, especially not from slaves. The transport docked on an unknown world, a glittering citadel that pulsed with cold energy. Dane was herded through dark, sterile hallways, flanked by armed guards. The walls here were pristine, the air thick with the scent of alien technology. He was thrown into a holding cell with other captives, each one silent, eyes filled with resignation. A few hours passed before a high-ranking officer, a tall and elegant creature with silver skin, entered. It didn't speak, but the words of its mind echoed in Dane's head. "You are to fight. Fight for your life. Fight for our entertainment." It was then that the realization hit. He wasn't just being punished. He was being put on display. The arena. The Union loved their games. Gladiatorial contests held in colossal arenas, where slaves fought to the death for the amusement of their alien overlords. Species from all over the galaxy gathered to watch as the strongest were pitted against each other, and the weakest were slaughtered for sport. And Dane, now a part of this horrifying tradition, was about to be one of those sacrifices. The doors to the arena opened, and he was shoved into the blinding light. The crowd's roar crashed against his ears, a thunderous wave of alien voices and mechanical noise. Beneath his feet, the sand of the arena shifted, damp with the blood of countless others who had come before him. Dane was thrown into a pit with a massive beast, a four-armed creature with jagged spines running down its back and eyes like molten lava. It roared as it charged, its claws slicing through the air. For a moment, all Dane could think was, "I am going to die here." But then, something inside him snapped. The knowledge from the device, the old Earth manuals, all those hours of reading, his body had absorbed it all. He had trained in secret, in silence. The human will to survive wasn't something that could be extinguished so easily. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for every human who had ever been enslaved, for every broken spirit in the galaxy who had been told they were worthless. The beast lunged at him, its claws slashing. Dane dove to the side, rolling in the sand, narrowly avoiding the fatal strike. He'd seen creatures like this before. He knew its weak points, its movements. Using his agility and training, he darted toward a fallen weapon, an energy blade that hummed with deadly precision. The crowd watched in silence as Dane, bloodied and battered, took the beast down with a single strike to its heart. The beast collapsed, its fiery eyes dimming as it crumpled to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Dane stood over the creature's carcass, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't care about their approval. All that mattered was the message. Humans were not beasts. Humans were not slaves. He wasn't going to die here. Not today. And in that moment, he knew this was only the beginning. Dane's victory in the arena didn't make him a hero. It made him a weapon. The Union expected him to break, like every other human slave before him. They thought he would be nothing more than a spectacle, another obedient gladiator whose only purpose was to entertain. Instead, he had become a symbol, a defiant spark in a galaxy of oppression. But sparks can be dangerous. Soon after the fight, Dane was taken back to his cell, where the overseers kept him under tight watch. They didn't know it yet, but they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity. The first sign came just hours later when a small group of prisoners, all human, gathered in secret. They knew what had happened. They knew what Dane had done, and they knew what it meant. They were no longer just slaves. They were something more. The humans in the cell whispered in hushed tones, their faces filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. They weren't ready to fight. Not yet. But they weren't ready to just lie down and die either. "We need to get out of here," one whispered. Dane nodded, his mind already racing. It was time to act. The Union had made a mistake, and now he had a chance to exploit it. He wasn't the only one who had seen cracks in their system. That night, when the overseers passed through, the humans acted. They disabled the security systems. They hacked the communications. They sabotaged the life support systems. It was all small things, but in the right hands, even the smallest actions could cripple a larger machine. By the time the alarms started blaring, the prisoners had already made their move. With chaos spreading through the facility, Dane led them to the docks, where ships and transports waited to carry them to freedom. The escape was fast, messy, and dangerous, but they were free. For the first time in his life, Dane felt the cold, endless void of space wrap around him. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. They were alive, and they weren't alone anymore. The humans stole a small, decommissioned warship, a relic of an older conflict. It wasn't much, but it would serve. They could use it to escape, to hide, to strike back. They called it the Freeborn, after the thing they had just become. The ship's engines roared to life, and Dane felt the pull of the unknown. They were no longer bound to one world. They weren't confined to the pits or the arenas. They were going to make the Union regret the day they ever laid eyes on Earth. As they blasted into the blackness of space, something in Dane's chest twisted, a sense of urgency swelling inside him. They needed more than a ship. They needed an army. They needed to become the nightmare. But there was no turning back now. The Freeborn was nothing more than a rusted shell when they first took it. But to Dane, it was a symbol. It was a chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. The crew aboard the Freeborn was a mix of human prisoners, former gladiators, and renegade aliens who had defected from the Union. They had no formal training, no experienced officers, and no weapons to speak of. What they had was anger, determination, and a burning desire to be free. And for the first time in years, they had hope. They spent the first few weeks scavenging the outer sectors of Union space, gathering supplies from abandoned colonies and derelict ships. Every move was calculated, quiet, strategic, like shadows in the dark. They couldn't afford to be seen. If the Union caught wind of their existence, they'd be hunted down like animals. Dane knew that better than anyone. He had seen the way the Union responded to rebellion. Swift, brutal, and absolute. But the Freeborn wasn't just a ship, it was a message. And slowly, that message began to spread. It started with small strikes, attacks on Union supply lines, sabotage of communication satellites, and liberating isolated slave camps. Every action was clean, efficient, and quick. There were no grand battles, no bold confrontations, just quiet, calculated moves that struck fear into the hearts of the Union's leaders. The humans, fueled by a desire to avenge their broken past, had learned to fight in ways the Union couldn't predict. They didn't rely on brute strength or overwhelming force. Instead, they used their wits, their adaptability, and their sheer willpower. They learned to hack into Union systems, to turn their own technology against them, and to move in the shadows, unseen and unheard. But it wasn't just the humans who were rising. The Freeborn's reputation spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Slaves from dozens of worlds sent word of their escape, and more began to defect. The Union's grip on its territories began to loosen planet by planet. The more they tried to stamp out the Freeborn, the more it spread, like a virus, infecting their empire. It wasn't long before whispers of the Unbroken became a rallying cry. It didn't matter where you were from, what species you were, if you were oppressed, if you were enslaved, you were part of the cause. A revolution had begun, and it wasn't just about humans anymore. It was about every race, every people who had been crushed beneath the heel of the Union. But Dane knew it couldn't stay small forever. The Union was vast, its power nearly infinite. They would not fall without a fight. If the Freeborn was going to succeed, they would need more than sabotage. They needed an army. They needed to strike at the heart. And so, they began to plan. The Union had always believed itself invincible. A collection of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful species, it had crushed rebellions before. It had enslaved entire civilizations and left them to rot in the shadows of their empire. But there was one thing they didn't understand. Humans were not like the other races. They weren't just survivors. They were builders, innovators, and revolutionaries. They didn't bow to authority. They rose. The Freeborn was now more than a ship. It was a force. Dane and his Ragdig crew had transformed from scavengers into a highly mobile, highly skilled group of guerrilla warriors. But their message had begun to echo beyond the ships and colonies. It spread through the stars, first as whispers, then as a shout. The Union had never faced anything like this. Rebels, yes. Pirates, yes. But an organized, ever-growing movement with the singular goal of taking down the galaxy's most powerful empire. That was something they couldn't ignore. The first sign that the Union was afraid came when they began to mobilize their fleet. Massive warships, their hulls bristling with weaponry, began to patrol the borders of Union space, their eyes searching for any sign of the Freeborn. But Dane and his crew weren't foolish enough to engage directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they focused on sabotage, strategic strikes that disrupted the Union's logistics, crippled their supply chains, and exposed the cracks in their empire. Communications went dark in major sectors. Military installations were left in ruins. Data was stolen and broadcast to the galaxy, showing the atrocities committed by the Union's upper echelons. Human suffering, alien experiments, and the cruelty of the Empire were laid bare for all to see. And that was just the beginning. It wasn't long before entire systems began to shift. Planets that had once pledged allegiance to the Union suddenly found themselves questioning everything they had been told. Former allies turned their backs on the regime, quietly offering support to the growing rebellion. Entire fleets of enslaved beings, beasts, machines, and sentient species alike rose up against their masters, emboldened by the message of the Freeborn. They no longer feared the Union. They hated it. And then, the Unbroken did what the Union feared most. They didn't fight like traditional armies. They didn't fight with strength or power. They fought with information. Every battle, every skirmish, every operation had a message attached to it. Each victory was not just a blow to the Union. It was a statement that humanity and its allies were no longer afraid. They were no longer content to be pawns in the galaxy's game. But Dane wasn't content to simply be a thorn in the Union side. No, his vision was bigger. The time had come to strike at the very heart of the Union, the Citadel. It was the symbol of their rule, the place where their darkest decisions were made. If they could bring it down, the entire empire would follow. The Freeborn was ready. The crew was ready. But the Union wasn't going to give up without a fight. The Citadel was more than just the capital of the Union. It was the beating heart of their empire, a massive fortress orbiting a dying star, surrounded by layers of defense that even the most seasoned military commanders feared to face. It was where the highest decisions were made, where the galaxy's most powerful species gathered to maintain their grip on the stars. But to Dane and the crew of the Freeborn, it was a target, a symbol of everything they had fought against. For months, they had gathered intelligence on the Citadel, studying its defenses, its security systems, and the secretive inner workings of the Union's government. Every report was meticulously analyzed, every weakness exploited. They knew it wouldn't be easy. In fact, it was likely to be a suicide mission. But they had no choice. The time had come to bring down the beast, and they would do it on their terms. The plan was simple but incredibly dangerous. They would infiltrate the Citadel using a series of covert strikes, each one designed to weaken its defenses and create openings for the final blow. It wasn't about brute force. It was about precision, timing, and hitting where it hurt the most. Dane stood on the bridge of the Freeborn, staring out at the vast expanse of space as they approached the Citadel. His heart beat loudly in his chest, but his mind was clear. This was what they had been working toward for so long. The stakes were higher than ever before, and there was no turning back now. "We've got one shot at this," he said, turning to the crew around him. "If we fail, everything we've fought for, everything we've bled for, will be lost. But if we succeed, if we bring the Citadel down, the Union will fall. This galaxy will be free." The crew nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They had all lost something to the Union: family, homes, dignity. And now they had a chance to take it all back. The first wave of their strike force, small, stealthy, and armed with cutting-edge technology, slipped past the outer defenses. They used their knowledge of Union systems to disable key infrastructure, knocking out communications and weakening the Citadel's shield generators. Each strike was a surgical operation, silent, deadly, and swift. The Union's forces scrambled, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The Freeborn and its crew were already inside. Dane led the second wave personally, boarding a covered shuttle and cutting through the Citadel's outer ring. They landed in the heart of the fortress, where Union leaders gathered to plan their next conquest. The halls were eerily quiet, but Dane knew the storm was coming. The Freeborn had breached the Citadel's walls. The war for the galaxy had entered its final phase. The crew pushed forward, tearing through the security forces in their way. Every step brought them closer to the core, where the Union's leadership waited, unaware that their empire was about to crumble. But as they neared their target, Dane couldn't shake the feeling that the Union had expected them. That this, too, was part of the plan. Dane's heart pounded as he and his crew advanced through the labyrinthine corridors of the Citadel. The air felt thick with tension, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat signaling their inevitable confrontation. The final stage of their plan was within reach, the heart of the Union, where their leaders controlled the galaxy's fate. It was a place where billions of lives were shaped by decisions made behind polished walls. But as they neared the core of the Citadel, a chilling realization began to settle in. The Union had been waiting for them. They had anticipated this move. The doors that should have been locked, the security systems that should have been down, were all functioning. The Union's leadership knew the rebellion was coming. They had allowed it. Dane didn't have time to process the implications. He couldn't afford hesitation now. The plan had to succeed, no matter what. They couldn't stop. Suddenly, the steel doors to the central chamber slid open with a hiss, revealing a sleek, imposing room filled with Union commanders. The galaxy's elite. Their faces, composed and regal, flickered in surprise upon seeing the humans, and their ragtag allies burst into the room. The time for games had ended. "Welcome," said a voice, low and cold. It came from the figure standing at the center of the room. Supreme Commander Zalrix, one of the highest-ranking officials in the Union. His tall, angular frame was draped in dark ceremonial armor. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "You came far," Zalrix continued, his tone dismissive, as though they were nothing more than an inconvenience. "But you are too late. The Union has already prepared for your pathetic rebellion. Your efforts are meaningless." Dane's eyes locked onto the commander, his grip tightening on his weapon. He knew this moment was coming, the confrontation with the mastermind behind their suffering. But he wasn't prepared for the cold certainty in Zalrix's voice. "You think we're finished?" Dane shot back, his voice rising. "You've underestimated humanity. You've underestimated what happens when people are pushed too far." The commander smirked, and a subtle motion behind him revealed several soldiers, armored and ready for combat. The Union had not only anticipated them, they had prepared for a final stand. But Dane wasn't backing down. With a battle cry, the crew charged, blasting their way toward the Union leaders. The fire was fierce, chaos erupting as human and alien combatants clashed. But the Union soldiers weren't prepared for the fury of the humans. Every strike they delivered was precise, every move a direct answer to the years of oppression they had endured. Dane charged forward, leaping past the enemy ranks, heading straight for Zalrix. The two locked eyes for a fleeting moment, and Dane could see it, fear in the commander's gaze. Zalrix had never faced an enemy like this. He had never encountered the sheer, unrelenting will of those who had nothing left to lose. The fight between them was brutal. Zalrix's alien strength clashed against Dane's human resolve, but in the end, it was the human spirit that broke through. With a final, decisive strike, Dane knocked the Supreme Commander to the ground, disarming him and holding his weapon to Zalrix's throat. "I told you," Dane said, his voice low, "we're not your slaves. This galaxy is ours now." With Zalrix's fall, the Citadel's defenses crumbled, and the Union's leadership was defeated. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia began to unravel. The revolution was no longer a dream. It was reality. The galaxy was free.